that makes sense? Can you talk us through your area of research specifically? 'Cause I know you've done a lot of stuff with like children and accessibility for kids and stuff like that. Could you highlight a little bit more about what you've done, maybe like recently or just something that you're proud of, like whatever it is?
Yeah, okay. So I'm interested in looking at accessibility.
Yeah.
But I come to it from with a very different flavor. Our lab is called the Diverse Ability Interaction Lab. That's one of the big access lab. That's what it's called. That's how it's known to the world. And we always look at assistive technology from the perspective of designing for both the disabled and the non-disabled groups as they interact with each other. So if we look at, take whatever disability, so we work in things like visual impairment, dementia, autism, physical impairment, limb difference. We have a range of things like that. But for any topic, we're interested in not designing just for the disability. So for example, not just for visual impairment, but in the interaction between the visually impaired person and their sighted social group. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we do. But in our approach to doing this, we have a strong, both philosophically and methodologically, strong stance on co-design. So we strongly believe that we have to engage with the people who have the experience of whether this is the disability, the ability, the context that we're working on, so that we co-design with them potential solutions for whatever things we're looking at with them. So whether this is, like I said, adults or children or anybody who we target with the technology. So they should lead and be partners in the co-design process with us. So we do a lot of co-design work. The other thing that I'm really interested in is how to bring a richer range of sensory modalities into human-computer interaction. So if you think about the basic way we interact with computers, there is a screen, we look at it, there is a keyboard, we type on it, or a phone, we scroll with our finger like this. So it's extremely reductive to what a human being is. Okay, we're not a finger and we're not a set of eyes, we're more. So I'm interested in thinking about how to bring other sensory modalities as much as possible. So we're talking about obviously sound, tactile, haptic feedback, but also smell, taste, proprioception. How do we actually interact with it? What does it mean to have an interface that's based on smell, for instance? And that's an interesting intersection, because if we look at disability, often we look at things that are related to sensory experiences.
Yep.
So whether this is the loss of a sensory of a sense, like if you're visually impaired, or the importance of sensory interaction within the particular condition or disability or experience that we're looking at. Like for example, for autism, sensory modalities are extremely important.
Yeah.
So I marry these two things. I marry the look at assistive technology from the perspective of inclusive interaction between both disabled and non-disabled people, and I bring fundamental design and perception studies of sensory modalities, and I look at the intersection of the two. Okay? So how can we solve the problem of inclusion?
Yeah.
How to include through technology by bringing a richer set of sensory modalities into interaction. So for instance, if we design an education technology that's inclusive of both sighted and visually impaired children in the mainstream schools, which was a project that was just finished, then we think about designing with the kids, with the teachers, with the parents, a wider range and richer range of sensory modalities into educational technologies that are inclusive of both blind and sighted children. Okay, so that's kind of what I do, and what I'm proud of. So one of the things that comes back a lot now, I've done a lot of work with kids, especially in schools, and with disabilities in general, with dementia, with autism. And one of the things that came up from our lab is this notion of what we called an assistance bubble. And that kind of really captures very well our approach to doing accessibility. The assistance bubble, as we observed it, and we did a lot of research, contextual inquiries, and ethnographic studies to find it, is this idea that traditional assistive technology, while important, often when it's deployed in a particular context, it isolates the disabled person from the rest of the social interaction. So think of a child in a classroom, and they have all the assistance they need. They have a personal assistant sitting with them. They have a screen magnifier or a blade display or a screen reader or all the assistive tech they need to learn in the mainstream classroom. But actually that exact support is done in a way that's based on traditional notions of what a disability is, what assistance is, that it bubbles them up, it isolates them from the rest. So that's the assistance bubble, we call it. And we find it across a range of domains, whatever disability is concerned. And what we're interested in is expanding that bubble or even bursting it completely so that we design for everybody, all the abilities in that space. We don't focus on accessibility of immediate things like making sure the child can read content, can access graphics, even though they're blind. That's that's the traditional notion of accessibility. We're interested to focus on inclusion. So how do they do that while at the same time having a meaningful learning experience with everybody else in the classroom? Okay, so that's one model and one piece of work that's been extremely influential and captures exactly our approach to doing work in this area. And so that's one major thing. The other major thing that I'm very, very big on is, like I said, bringing this richer sensory modalities. And one way we do this is to look at something called cross-sensory or cross-modal cognition. The idea here is that we know from fundamental perception and cognition that the way the information that I get from one sense, like the vision or the sound, can be immensely influenced by the other sensory modalities that I have available to me. Okay, so an example of this kind of notion of sensory integration is what you're doing now. You're looking at me and you're hearing some sounds and you're associating the sound with my mouth. If there was another person here, you'll be certain that it's me talking, not the other person. So you've done some kind of sensory integration that you combine two senses together, and that help you make meaning out of the interaction that we're having. So that's a fundamental phenomena, but it goes really, really deep into the way we perceive and understand the world. For example, sometimes you go to have a meal, and the kind of music that you're hearing or the lighting of the room might actually influence the taste.
Interesting.
There's some interesting work that looks at that and precisely identify this kind of effect. Sometimes we study things like that, these kind of cross-modal correspondences and influence across the senses. Okay, and we do that across a range of sensory modalities. We see how touch could be influenced by sound, how color could have a texture or even a taste or a smell. And in understanding those things across different groups, across the sighted, the visually impaired, the hearing impaired, we start to identify what is shared understanding or shared cross-modal cognition between them. And that's what we use as a basis for our design of inclusive technology. So it's a fairly maybe complex things to convey. Hopefully I managed to convey it to you. But it's a very important way of doing inclusive design, because we can say words like inclusive design and including people, and it's all nice and lovely values and all that. But how do you actually do it? And our approach is to think of both disabled and non-disabled people at the same time, co-design with people, and also bring in fundamental understanding of our cross-modal cognition and perception, so that as you engage in the interaction and there is sounds and smells and touch and things, these are not arbitrary. They're based on a fundamental understanding of human perception and cognition across groups.
Especially when you're talking about like smell and stuff. Like I always have this. So like I grew up in China until I was about 13, and I moved here with my mother. And I remember every time, even now, like when I went over this year in April, when I land, there's like a distinct smell China has, and it just triggers so many memories, and like it makes me feel like certain type of way, like like just there's so much. So
that emotional connection between the senses, it's something we study quite a lot in my group. So we look at how sensory modalities interact, but we always think about, okay, so what kind of emotions do you elicit with this stuff? And one of the work we've done is basically look at the various what we call association strategies that people have. We come up with 5 or 6 strategies that people tend to use when they're trying to make sense. Like when you say, when you land and you have that smell in China, that clearly there's something about why it triggers particular emotions, and we try to understand what are the strategies that people have and then again use that as an interaction design material. Okay, it's like, okay, if we understand how you experience smell and how that other person experiences smell and your association strategy, their association strategies, maybe we can start to create common ground that's actually grounded in your own experience, and that might facilitate more inclusive interactions and more potential for understanding and engagement.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, that is really cool. Yeah. I listen to this now, just like, wow, I wish I could study this, you know?
Yeah, I really like it, and our work has been quite nice in here. We're known in the field in HCI for bringing. Well, there's a lot of work in cognitive science and experimental psychology on these notions, but it doesn't really come into HCI that much. So in our lab we've been working very hard to bring these notions of cross-modal cognition and cross-modal perception into HCI, and specifically looking at the context of inclusive design, that being a vehicle for inclusive design. Yeah.
Oh, it's very interdisciplinary, isn't it? Just
Yeah.
mentioned, it's like across so many different things. It's not just a one subject area.
I think so. If you talk to any other of the academics in BIC, he will tell you a very different story of ACI and what they do and so on. So, like I said at the beginning, that's one of the most interesting things about the field, because it's by default it's extremely interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit. So for example, here we're in computer science. BIG is a computer science HCI group. In Bath, you have computer science. You have psychology. You might be in design. You go in Goldsmiths. It's quite a design-oriented HCI group. So. And that's really how we should be looking at problems or challenges in the world. You want to ask a question, you want to come to it from a multiplicity of perspectives and discipline in order to try to answer them.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.